Hi everyone, I'm Robin Worley, and today I want to walk you through an example of editing this image. I'm going to use Lightroom and I'm going to use Nik. And what's different this time is that, unlike when I normally edit my images, I'm not going to do a lot of preparation. In fact, I'm just going to dive in and I'm going to freestyle a bit with this image, see where it takes us. I've just finished writing a blog post. I need an image to go with it, so this is the one I've selected. At the time, it was shot in a place called Fairy Glen near Betws in Wales, and it was shot on a micro 4/3 camera. It was an Olympus EM5. Up here you can see it was shot at ISO 200, 65mm, f7.1 and 39-second exposure. I think I had a 6-stop neutral density filter on the front of the camera at the time, but it was quite dark as well. So this is the image and I've got it in Lightroom, so I'm going to start off by making a couple of basic adjustments. The first thing I'm going to do is set my camera calibration down here to, rather than the Adobe standard, I'm going to send it to camera natural, and I prefer this setting with the Olympus camera. The only difficulty is, as you probably saw there, it sends the image quite dark in the shadows, so the next thing we're going to have to do is try to open this up a little bit. Often dropping the contrast back will allow me to do this. You can see already that's opening, and I'm going to open up the shadow areas as well. Pull the blacks down a little bit because we're losing some of the blacks in this area and I still want to retain those, and let's just warm the image very slightly there. Okay, that's an improvement. I'm also going to pull the highlights back so we don't blow the water out later when we try and edit it. Okay, that's not looking too bad. So next, let's zoom in on some of these rock areas. And I can see here there's a reasonable amount of noise in the rock, given that I've just opened up the shadows and also this is such a long exposure. So the thing I'm going to do is try to correct that to some degree with the sharpening and noise reduction. Now at the moment the default noise reduction for colour is set to about 25, I think, yep, 25, and I'm actually going to reduce that slightly because what it does is it tends to remove colour from some of the more detailed areas. And I'm also going to push this detail slider up here just to try to hold any colour correction in these areas, and that still looks okay. The other thing I want to do is reduce the luminance noise, which is affecting these areas. So as I did that, you can see that coming in. And I'm also going to use the detail slider just to try to recover some of those details and stop them all blurring out. Now, as I'm doing that, I can notice I've still got some colour noise in this area, and I'm going to just increase this a little bit more just to help recover that. Okay, now that looks good. What I'm going to do next is try to adjust the sharpening. So the default settings aren't too bad, but I'm actually going to push the sharpness up a little bit more and also the detail. Now as I do that, I can see everything sharpening up nicely, but it's also revealing more noise here. So I'm going to counter that by upping the masking slider there, so that's stopping the noise from being sharpened, but it's still keeping the rest of the image sharp. So if I move around a little bit, we can see over here, nice and sharp, and we can see up in the trees here, also nice and sharp. So that's not looking too bad now. So I'm going to zoom out, and the next thing I'm going to do is go back to my basic adjustment, and let's see if we can add a little bit of clarity in there. That doesn't really do much. Let's see what vibrancy does. Okay, not too bad. And a little bit of saturation. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. It still looks a little bit blue, but the shadow areas, I'm okay with them being blue. What I do like is this colourful foliage back here, and also I'd like a little bit more colour on the edges of the rocks here. So I'm going to make a selective adjustment, and when I do this I'm going to actually turn on the show select mask overlay just so I can see where I'm painting. So let's take a look at the brush settings. So I'm using brush A. I can adjust the size of the brush either with this slider or with some of the keys on the shortcut. The feather and the flow are okay. As the flow's less than 100, it means I'm going to be able to make a couple of strokes of the brush in order to build that up to the maximum. I'm actually going to reduce that down to something like 65 just to allow me to make a few keystrokes here. So first off, let's just select this area up here roughly and down into the valley. So I'm selecting here just the background. Doesn't matter if I don't get it too accurate at this stage, and I'll go over that with some more keystrokes there, or brush strokes rather, and again there, and finally just again a couple of times. Okay, so I can turn that off now, and now I can start to make my adjustments. So I'm going to warm that area up. I'm going to up the contrast at the moment. I'm going to up the dehaze because I just want those elements to stand out a bit more, and I'm going to actually reduce the clarity just slightly, as well as reduce the exposure. And now I'm going to build the saturation there. Now I don't need to do too much to this because I'm going to take it into Viveza in a moment, see what I can do there. That doesn't look too bad at the moment. Now, next thing I want to do is add another brush adjustment. So we'll create a new brush, and this time I'm going to select the areas here where the leaves are on the rock. So let's just show that. Okay, you can see that being selected, and also here, a little bit there, a little bit there. So again, I can use multiple brush strokes to select those, and then I can also use a sort of faint brush stroke on some of the other rocks just to select those as well. Okay, that looks like a reasonable amount of colour coming in, and we'll uncheck that. Now let's lighten those up slightly with a temperature increase. That's not too bad. We will pull the shadows up a little bit, up the contrast, up the clarity, and up the saturation very slightly. Do we need a little bit more a warmth? No, we'll keep it at around that. Okay, next thing is I'm going to add a final couple of brush strokes, this time on here and here. We'll just check that again. Yep, and also here. Just come down a little bit more. Okay, and I'm just going to warm those up again with a temperature adjustment there, and we'll increase the clarity. I'm actually going to increase the exposure ever so slightly just to make it look like there's light falling on them, and then I'm just going to up the saturation, and also we'll add a little bit more clarity in there. Okay, so I've done now, finished that, and that's not looking too bad at all. The other thing that I'm going to also do is I'm going to go to the effects, and I'm going to add in a vignette. That's quite a heavy vignette, but I'm going to feather it a bit more, and I'm going to open up the midpoint so that I'm only concentrating the vignette into the very corners. So if I turn that off, you can see the effect it's having, and it just draws the eye into this central area here in the gorge. Now the other thing I can do, we'll just try it, is if I drag out a elliptical adjustment here with the radial filter, and we'll just show what's been selected. Okay, the centre, so that's the area that's going to be adjusted. I can now increase my exposure. I might go for a negative clarity. What does the dehaze do? Okay, it darkens it slightly. I might reduce the contrast as well, and that gives me a bit more of a hazy feeling to the image. Let's see if it's worth upping the saturation. Not too much. Okay, so just let's have a look again. Okay, that's not too bad. You can feather this to create a broader, more feathered selection, so we'll go with that. Okay, I'm reasonably happy with that now. So those are the adjustments done in Lightroom, and now I'm going to take this into the Photoshop, and in Photoshop this is where I'm going to work on it a little bit further using a couple of Nik filters. Definitely I'm going to try Viveza. I might try Color Efex when we've done with this. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Let's just add a Viveza adjustment now. And here we are in Viveza, and the first thing I'm going to do is try to adjust the shadows a little bit more, so we can open up the shadows. I might add a little bit of contrast there. That doesn't look too bad. Okay, I'm now going to make a selection of the area here, because I'm thinking these areas I've got quite a lot of nice colour there. So by the way, what I'm doing here is I'm holding down the control key as I'm moving the point around, and that helps me select the area properly. Now what I really want to do is add some warmth into these areas, add a bit more saturation, and probably just tone the brightness down ever so slightly, and the contrast I'm actually going to reduce, I think, there. Do I want to add any structure? No, I don't. Other thing I want to do is select the leaves here. So again, hold down the control key. I'm using a Windows PC, by the way, and I'm going to warm up the area there, and I'm going to actually add some contrast into the area and a little bit of structure, and then I'm going to boost the saturation a little bit. Okay, so you can see the colour coming into those areas. Now again, up here on the trees, let's make a selection, and I'm going to warm that ever so slightly, add a little bit of contrast, add some saturation, a little bit of structure just to make it stand out further, and again up here. Okay, and we will add some warmth, we will add some structure and a little bit of contrast, and then the final one I'm probably going to make the same adjustment but over here. So what I'll do is I'll copy that control point down, so I hold down the Alt key and I can simply drag a new copy of the control point over here, so you can see that now being added onto that area, and the other control point still remains in place up there. So that's all looking pretty good now. I'm probably going to add a little bit more down here, so there's some colour there that seems to be coming in, or light I should say, on the rocks, so I'm going to emphasize that now with a little bit of contrast, reduce the shadows slightly, and let's try to up the saturation. Okay, it's looking a bit green, but not too bad. I'll add in a little bit more warmth as if there's sunlight hitting that, and then I'll duplicate that control point, so hold down the Alt key, drag across, and we'll place another control point around there. That's all fine. And now we can, let's see if the adding some warmth overall to the image is good. Yes, it is actually, but I don't really like what it's doing to the water. So there, I'm going to add a control point to the water, and I'll make a selection of all that. And at the same time, you could reduce the warmth slightly, and we'll up the contrast, and we'll up the structure, but we'll pull down the brightness, and that leaves a bit of texture in the water. Okay, so that's looking quite nice now. Let's compare it to the original. There we are, and the new version's looking quite good. If you want to see it side by side, there you go. I like that. We'll take that back into Photoshop now. And once Viveza's done its work, let's take a look to see if we can do any more in Color Efex Pro. Okay, so Color Efex Pro loads up and I've set it to load my last filter used. Now that's the Pro Contrast filter and is something that I use quite a lot. So let's take a look at the dynamic contrast, which I do like because it tends to open up detail in dark contrasty areas. Does the color correction do anything? No, it sends things a bit blue. And the contrast, I don't know if I really like that too much. So I'm happy with the Pro Contrast as it is. Let's add another filter. Let's see if we can add something in with the sunlight filter. Okay, that has added quite a bit of glow there. What I'm going to do is make some selections to try to reduce the effect of the glow or concentrate it down into certain areas. So here we have it on the tree branches. Gives it a bit of a misty ethereal feel, and here what I'm doing is I'm actually reducing the opacity rather than using the strength sliders over here. I'm going to add another one to the leaves here and also here, and let's just add some to the moss here and the leaves up here, and finally up here as well. No, actually we'll do another one up there. Okay, so that's actually starting to look quite nice. I'm not sure if I want it to be quite as warm as that. Let's just play. Yeah, actually it's not too bad. And I'm going to adjust the light strength down slightly. Actually I think that opacity needs to be higher. That one needs to be a little bit lower. And again over here on the control point we'll reduce that down, and also that one. The effect could be too strong otherwise. I like to keep the foreground detail a lot sharper than the background there, which is looking a bit mistier. Gives a nice feeling of depth to the image. The other thing I think I want to do is add a little bit more contrast into this area here. So I'm going to add another Pro Contrast filter there. So this time I'm going to make a selection here, and now I'm going to add in, rather than the dynamic contrast, I'm going to actually add back normal contrast into this area. So quite happy with that. And also I think here we'll add in quite a bit of contrast as well. That's looking good. And we'll add in another filter now, and this time what we'll do is I think we'll add in the fog filter. So let's have a look at fog. That looks terrible, doesn't it? So I'm actually going to go to fog version 2 and I'm going to select it up here in the sky, and I'm going to reduce the intensity down, and what that's doing is it's giving me a nice misty feel to the image. And I'm also going to add a fog filter down here to the water, which gives it a much more misty feel to it now. Now what I don't want is the fog filter affecting these foreground rocks, so I'm using this setting here, this control point which is set to 0 opacity, just to select and mask out these areas, and that's creating quite a nice look now. Okay, so let's compare that then. That's the original, that's the new version, and side by side that's probably looking quite good. I'm going to try one more filter just for effect now, and we will try the one of the contrast filter. So I'm trying to remember which one it actually is. I think it's the tonal contrast that I want to try. Here we are, tonal contrast, and that actually is quite severe. So I'm going to set that to fine first off. I'm going to set all these back to very low values, and I'll set the adjustment there to 0, and I'm going to just restrict this to these areas here, and I'm probably going to just try mid-tone and shadow contrast. No, I'm going to reduce the shadow contrast just a little bit. To be honest, don't think that's doing anything, so we'll delete the filter. The other thing that I might try and do now is add a levels and curves. This is always useful because the image is looking a little bit too light, and I actually quite like to intensify it with an adjustment like this. So let's just pull that down a little bit, and there we go. Okay, original, new version, and side by side. I think that's achieved what I want it to do. So we'll accept that, and we'll just check it again in Photoshop just to make sure we're satisfied with how everything looks, and if it is, I'm going to save it, and we'll then take that into the blog for illustrating one of the blog posts. Okay, so that's the image now. We'll take the previous version, the background version that we came out of the original Lightroom with, and there you are. So you can see substantial effect there from just using a couple of the Nik filters. I quite like that. We can go with that. I might make a few more adjustments there just to take the colour away from the water. So we'll add a mask there, and we'll take a soft brush here, painting with black. I'll reduce the size of that down, and we will paint out the adjustment here onto the water, because it's getting a little bit too orange with the previous adjustment. Okay, nearly done. Okay, that keeps the original adjustment quite nice and blue in those areas. I like that, so there we go. That's the difference, quite substantial. Hope you found that useful and interesting, and keep watching for more tips in the future. Thank you.